ranking the position coaches, surprise starters, underrated opponents, questions on that, and a lot more on today's mailbag on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, we'll see if we can close the week without me stumbling through too many more of my words on this Friday edition of the Morning Pit here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website name below, and that's the place you want to go if you want to get all of the Pitt sports news. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. Pitt fans are talking about Pitt sports at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and our YouTube channel here, where we ask you to like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you never miss any of our Pitt video content. These daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday. The live show on Wednesday nights, every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammett get together to talk about Pitt sports for an hour. Recruit interviews, player interviews, post-game press conferences, all those kinds of things that we do on our video channel here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You don't want to miss any of it, so make sure you like this video and subscribe. And I'm chuckling because you might have heard the sound of a dog shaking its collar, and here on the morning on the mailbag edition of the Morning Pit, one of the questions we had in the mailbag was from Atwood409. Says, do you have dogs in the recording studio? I feel like I can hear their collars. If so, what kind are they? And you're right. We have two dogs here in the Panther-Lair home offices, in the Panther-Lair studio, and they occasionally do make a little bit of a jingle. And it's funny that we had this question coming up, and the one dog, he's a beagle. His name's Copper. Yeah, he's shaking himself right now. He's got very big ears, so they flap along with the collar. But we've got Copper the beagle and Zero the terrier. He's a little mutt terrier, somewhat Jack Russell. And his name is Zero because he's kind of a zero. They were both rescues or whatever. I'm not sure where Zero came from. Copper was out wandering the woods of Washington County or something. But yeah, those are our two pups, our two mutts. They sit here and listen to me talk about Pitt sports all day, every day on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So there, you're right, Atwood. You can hear some of the you can hear some dogs in the background, and that's who you hear. And right now it's Copper, but he's done with me. He's leaving. He's going to go upstairs. Let's get on to some more questions. Of course, the questions come from the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Our premium message boards, the Between Fifth and Forbes message board, is where you can post your questions. Every week we put up a new thread to take questions for this weekly mailbag. You can post your questions in there, and we'll answer as many as we can on the mailbag episode. And Pitman 2003 asked what I think is an interesting question. Said, how would you rank the Pitt position coaches in regards to coaching, not recruiting? I would argue Partridge is the best and Salem is the worst, but the middle is tough to order for me. I don't know if I'm going to rank 1 through 10, but I'll give some general thoughts. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think Charlie Partridge is a really good coach. I remember Josh Conklin, when Josh Conklin was the defensive coordinator and Charlie Partridge came back. I remember Josh Conklin doing an interview and saying, people talk about Charlie Partridge being such a great recruiter, but the reality is that he's a great coach as well. I remember Josh saying that, and I think the proof, it speaks for itself. You look at his track record, speaks for itself. The players he's turned out, that speaks for itself. Charlie Partridge has done a great job coaching defensive line at Pitt and Wisconsin and everywhere he's been, and I think he definitely is right there up at the top. I think the two defensive back coaches, Archie Collins and Corey Sanders, are both really, really good. I think there have been other schools that have particularly tried to get Sanders away. I think Pitt has had to step up a little bit to keep him here. I think he's a really good coach. I think he did a good job working with DeMar Hamlin and Paris Ford. I think he did an even better job working with Eric Hallett and Brandon Hill. And I think we're going to see his work again this year with Javon McIntyre and Steph Hall and PJ O'Brien and Donovan McMillan. And I think because we were talking about the dogs, now the one dog is sitting here right under the desk just shaking away to make as much noise as possible. But I think we're going to see Corey Sanders work again this year with a whole new crop of starting safeties and a whole new two deep, really, of safeties. And I think we're going to see what kind of job he can do. We're going to see it again. I mean, same thing with Charlie Partridge. We've talked all offseason about how defensive end is reloading or rebuilding. Safeties are looking for new starters and a new two deep. And we're going to see Charlie Partridge and Corey Sanders both kind of doing their jobs, and I think doing them well this year as they coach up the new guys who are going to be taking over. I think Ryan Manilak's good. I think he's a pretty good coach at linebacker, so I guess I've pretty much covered the entire defensive staff. I think all the position coaches on defense are really good. I think Dave Borbley's done a nice job too. And that's sort of the kind of thing where just year after year you'll keep seeing it. And I think we have seen it with Dave Borbley over the past few years. You can maybe ask questions about his recruiting, although I think he does well with offensive line prospects. But I think he's been a really good coach. I don't really know about Tyquan Underwood. I mean, he still feels sort of new to me. I don't know about Andre Powell. I don't know if you would look at any of the running backs who have really excelled at Pitt in the last 8 years. I mean, James Conner, obviously, in 2016. Quadri Olson in 2015 and 2018. Conner in 16. Darren Hall in 2018. Izzy Abanikanda this past year. I feel like the success Pitt has had with running backs over the last 8 years has had more to do with either A, the talent of the back, or B, the design of the system. I mean, they ran the ball more in 15 and 16 and 18 than they did in 19, 20, 21. And then also in 2022, they ran the ball a lot more and they were more committed to it than they were in the previous 3 years. Who knows what some of those backs in 2019, 2020, or 2021 might have done with more of a run-heavy offense or more run-focused offense. Maybe they would have put up better numbers. Maybe it would have been better, but because of the offensive design, you just didn't see a whole lot of that. And so, I mean, that's a long way of saying that I think there are factors outside of the position coach when it comes to running back. I think there are factors outside of the position coach that have a bigger impact. And the talent of the player is certainly the number one factor. And the scheme of the offense is a huge factor. And I think when the backs have excelled, it's because the scheme has been a good system for them. It's worked well for them and they've been talented backs. So Andre Powell, I don't necessarily think he's a bad position coach. I just think the nature of running backs is such that it's hard to put too much on the coach himself. I think that is a position where you really need to be a great recruiter, and that's how you can really make your hay as a running back coach. So I like all the defensive guys. With Tim Salem, I think he's a great recruiter. It's tough because Pitt's tight ends just haven't done much outside of like 1 year over the last 8. So it's hard to gauge that. I think he's really good on the recruiting trail. I think he's really good at identifying players and all this kind of stuff, but I don't know about his coaching. And maybe that's a talent question as well. The quarterback's got to throw to him and all this kind of thing, but I don't know if we've seen much to really inspire much confidence. Andre Powell gets an incomplete grade or just sort of a standard running back coach grade. I think Dave Borbley's done a pretty good job. So, if you go through the position coaches, like the defensive guys, some questions on offense and some incomplete or, TBD situations like with Tyquan Underwood. Let's see the next question. Potter County native says, Kenny Pickett had 4 very mediocre seasons as a Power 5 quarterback before blossoming into a first-rounder in his COVID year and his third year in Mark Whipple's system. As Pitt fans, could we expect the same out of Djokovic under Frank Signetian with an improved offensive line? And it is funny to look back at Kenny's call him the first 3 years as a starter. His first year he played 4 games, he made 1 start, and obviously it was a very memorable one. He beat Miami. But his next 3 years, 2018 to 2020, he never threw more than 13 touchdowns. He had, 6 interceptions his first year as a starter, 9 each of his second 2 years. It wasn't very good. He barely completed 61% of his passes. It was nothing compared to what he did in his final year. There was no indication through Kenny Pickett's first 4 years of college football that he was capable of a season where he completed 67% of his passes, threw for 4,300 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 7 picks. I mean, there was no sign of that. I shouldn't say there was no sign of it. There were definitely moments where you said, okay, this guy's good. This guy can make some big-time throws. Even in 2020, the COVID year, where he completed 61% of his passes, 2,400 yards, 13 touchdowns, 9 picks. I mean, it wasn't a great season. But even then, I think there were throws that he made. Oh, wow, that's a big-time throw. That's a first-round draft pick type of throw. He just did a lot more of them and a lot more consistently in 2021. Can Phil Dracovic make a similar kind of jump? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's the million-dollar question of the whole offseason, right? Is can Phil Dracovic end his college career on a high note? Is reuniting with Frank Cignetti and playing behind a better offensive line going to make the difference for Dracovic and lead to him being, really good, and putting up, having a really effective season and putting up great numbers and leading Pitt to a lot of success and victories? I don't know. That's the million-dollar question. Pitt is banking on it happening. Pitt's banking on Phil Dracovic, all those factors sort of coming together for him. But there's a lot of unknowns there. Now, I would have said the same thing heading into 2021. There's a lot of unknowns. It was big news that Kenny Pickett came back, but there were still a lot of unknowns, certainly about the possibility of him playing at the level he ultimately reached. I don't think any of us expected that. Can it happen again like that? I don't know. Kenny Pickett also had a first-round draft pick at wide receiver, which helps. I'm not sure if Phil Dracovic has that on the roster this year. I don't know if he's going to be throwing to one this year. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. Could it happen? Sure. I see what they're kind of banking on. I see what they're hoping for and the factors they're sort of placing their hopes on. But I'm not really sure. But I don't know. I don't know if it will happen or not. Let's see. The Great Chris says, who do you view as possible surprise starters for this year? Presumably most positions have clear incumbents. What's the most wide open? So we've talked about the offensive line a little bit. Well, let's start at the top. I don't think quarterback it's wide open. If Phil Dracovic would struggle, Christian Veilleux would step in. But, he's pretty much got that job locked up. I think Rodney Hammond's the number one running back, but some of the other guys will play and contribute. Wide receivers will be a rotation with Mumfield, Means, and Reynolds largely being the top three. Tight end is going to be Gavin Bartholomew and whoever else can play with him. Offensive line, we talked about, there's some competition there, but I think we know the main players, the main 6 guys who are really going to be in that competition. Defensive end is an interesting one to me, and defensive end is a spot where I think you could end up seeing a surprise starter, and it could be someone like a Nakai Johnson. I think Dalen Hayes has more or less got a starting job locked up. I think Bam Brema will probably be the starter opposite him. But it's not like Bam Brema or Nate Temple, who are both seniors. It's not like either one of them has shown much in their careers to get to this point where you would say, okay, that's a proven commodity. They're very much not proven commodities. I was looking, Bam Brema has played 218 defensive snaps in his career at Pitt, according to Pro Football Focus. Nate Temple has played 100, and even 100 defensive snaps. Nakai Johnson played 56 last year. 56 snaps is not very much, but when you're comparing it to 100 and 218, it's not that much less. It's not so much less that you're automatically going to pencil those guys in above Nakai, or pen those guys in above Nakai and say Nakai has no chance. He might be a surprise starter there. Defensive tackle, maybe a Sean Fitzsimmons works his way up into the starting lineup. I think you'll probably have some combination of Tyler Bentley, Devin Danielson, and David Green as the starters. And then I think guys like Fitzsimmons will get a chance to contribute and make plays, even if they're coming off the bench. I think linebackers, we pretty much know who that group is. I think same thing with corners. And safety is sort of a 4-man battle with Javon McIntyre and Steph Hall and P.J. O'Brien and Donovan McMillan. I don't know how exactly that's going to shake out. I think some of the guys like Hall and McIntyre can play both safety spots, the field and the boundary. That's going to open up some options and some flexibility in how the coaches line him up out there. I think Donovan McMillan is mostly a boundary safety, a strong safety. PJ O'Brien's mostly a field safety, a free safety, but I think the other two guys can move around a little bit. But if I had to pick a surprise starter, maybe Nakai Johnson. Maybe Nakai Johnson finds himself in the starting lineup at defensive end at some point this season. Belzik927 says, which Pitt opponent in 2023 is most underrated in the preseason polls and will be a more difficult opponent than Pitt fans currently expect? I had a hard time with this one, mostly because I feel like we have a sense of who these teams are and who they're going to be. You know, I mean, the biggest games, the toughest games on the schedule are Notre Dame and Florida State. I don't think anybody would disagree about that, right? What do you put after that as tough games? Carolina, yeah. Possibly Duke. Maybe Duke would be the most underrated team on the schedule, but I think even Duke is getting some pub. You know what I mean? I think people are starting to get on the Duke bandwagon a little bit. I think it's sort of a sexy sort of surprise pick or sleeper pick. But I mean, you know, West Virginia or Cincinnati, I think people are giving them respect as Power 5 programs, but both are expected to take a step back from where they were a year ago. I don't see any reason to think Virginia Tech is going to take a giant leap forward. Maybe they'll be a little bit better, but I don't know about giant leap. Louisville, I think, will be about what they were a year ago, if not worse. Wake Forest, same thing. Syracuse, same thing. Boston College, same thing. So who is going to be a surprise? I mean, there will be somebody. There'll be somebody here like Duke was last year, where you look at it and say, wow, I didn't think they would be that good. Nobody jumps out to me right now. If you have some thoughts, though, if you see somebody on the schedule that maybe scares you more than the national pub they're getting, leave it in the comments. I'm curious to know who you're worried about with the 2023 opponents. Butler Pitt fan asks, have you heard anything on Kyle Lewis and his development at linebacker? I remember the coaches liked him until he got hurt. Any updates or chance he might get into the rotation this year? Yeah, I think it's possible. Kyle Lewis, I believe, did get on the field last year. Let me just look that up. He was hurt in training camp and missed, all of camp. Oh, he played in 4 games. So he got on the field against Louisville, Carolina, Syracuse, and UCLA. So, 4 second half of the season games. I don't know, was Louisville the second half or was that game 6? Either way, I mean, you get the point. For later games, and I hear a lot of positive hype about him. I hear a lot of excitement. I hear, from coaches, players, they think he's going to be really good and potentially could work his way into the rotation this year. I think the freshman linebackers have a chance to get on the field, whether it's Braylon Lovelace or Rasheem Biles or Jordan Bass. I think you could see at least 1, if not 2, or maybe even 3 of those guys playing this season and getting on the field at linebacker and on special teams. You've got Bengali Kamara, Shane Simon, Solomon DeShields, Brandon George. And then everything else is wide open after those 4 guys. You know what I mean? You're going to make a rotation of sorts out of those 4 guys, and everything else, everybody else is going to fit in somehow because there's a lot of room there. And there's room for guys like Lewis, Biles, Lovelace, Bass, Aiden Henningham. There are going to be opportunities, and I think Kyle Lewis is a guy they're excited about and excited to keep him healthy and try and get him on the field this year. So yeah, I think there's a real chance of that. I do. Butler Pitt fan also asks any updates on Addison Copeland after spring in the wide receiver corps. He seems to be forgotten. I just don't hear his name come up much when people talk about the wide receivers. This is me saying, not just coaches in press conferences, but just in general. When I talk to people about the wide receivers, I just don't hear Addison Copeland's name come up much. I was high on him as a recruit. I thought he looked really good as a prospect coming out of the state of New York. Just haven't heard much about him potentially being in the mix for playing time. They need receivers to step up. We know that. But I hear more about the true freshman than about the redshirt freshman. He's one, Jay Wabuko's the other one, but I hear more about guys like Kenny Johnson and Lamar Seymour and Izzy Polk. So, I don't know where Copeland fits into that mix. I really don't. Last one. Denny Nevo says, I read that Kenny Pickett tried to recruit Connor Hayward to Pitt. Did Pitt offer him when he was coming out of high school? They did. Let me bring up his Rivals page just real quick just to go over it. He was from Georgia. And Pitt did offer him. They recruited him quite a bit and got him on campus quite a bit. Now, we don't have any visits listed there, but he had come in for several visits, and they were pretty high on his list as a recruit coming out of high school. I want to see Yeah, he visited. Oh, he worked out at their prospect camp actually in the month of June. He had connections here. He was, pretty high on Pitt, but then he took an official visit to Michigan State in December and ended up signing with the Spartans. I think there was also a point where it looked like Connor Hayward might go into the transfer portal after a few years at Michigan State, maybe even. Now, it wouldn't have been after the Peach Bowl, but maybe, a season or two before the Peach Bowl year, it looked like he might go into the transfer portal, and Pitt was, possibly going to be one of the schools that he would consider. Now, it ended up not happening. He finished at Michigan State, and obviously he's, went on to play for the Steelers. But, yeah, Pitt was involved. Pitt was heavily involved. I think they wanted to make him a linebacker more than an offensive player, but, it was sort of take him as an athlete and figure out where you could work him in. But yeah, Pitt was involved. No question about that. They just weren't able to get him. And yeah, he was in the recruiting class of 2017, the same one that Pickett was in. And so, they overlapped probably that summer. Kenny working on trying to get offensive weapons or just trying to get talented players to the team. I guess it was Pitt was partially linebacker, partially fullback, partially tight end, partially H-back, the kind of thing he ended up ultimately doing. So they had Kenny Pickett working on him, but no luck in landing that one. I think that's about it. Great questions this week. I really appreciate everybody who contributed the questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Of course, next week we'll have training camp starting, so I'm sure you'll have lots of questions to get into then. Make sure you tune in to the message boards between Fifth and Forbes message board to ask your question in our mailbag thread, and we'll answer as many as we can on next week's mailbag edition of the Morning Pit. Thanks so much for tuning in today and for watching all week. I hope you had a great week and tried to stay out of this humidity because it's been obscene the last few days. Hopefully the weekend clears up for us a little bit, but stays dry. We don't want any rain. Want to enjoy one of these this last weekend of July. Want to have a good one. So, we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. But thanks again for tuning in today. Thanks for tuning in this week. We appreciate it. Hope you had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back with you Monday morning for a new Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.